Hi, this is Gwen Fisher with Environmental and Occupational Health 6639. This is the course in Occupational Health Psychology. We are in Module 5 right now. This is Module 5.2, Measuring Job Attitudes. Here's the agenda for Module 5.2. To discuss measuring job attitudes, we will cover the following topics. First, I will provide some background and an introduction to psychological measurement. Given that this course is offered in the School of Public Health, I understand that not everybody may have a background in psychology. Therefore, I will discuss basic reliability and validity as properties of psychological measurement. Then we will discuss the measurement of job satisfaction, including the distinction between overall and facet measures. Finally, we will talk about the measure of organizational commitment as another example of how to measure job attitudes. Here are the learning objectives for Module 5.2. By the completion of Module 5.2 on the measurement of job attitudes, I really hope that you will understand the basic concepts in psychological measurement, including reliability and validity. In addition, you should be able to explain how to measure job satisfaction and organizational commitment, as well as be able to explain the difference between overall and facet measures of these job attitudes. One of the reasons why we are talking about psychological measurement, and I would like to provide some background, is because psychological measurement is very different than how we assess other aspects of what happens in occupational health. For example, whereas industrial hygienists might take physical samples of the workplace, occupational medicine physicians are dealing with treating patients in a medical setting and in a clinical setting. In psychology, we rely a lot on self-report measures and surveys to assess perceptions of the work environment. We take the approach in psychology that perceptions are reality and that everybody may have different views or beliefs about their experiences. Even if two employees work in the same work setting, they may have different job attitudes. Because we rely so much on self-report surveys, we need to focus on issues of reliability and validity. I will talk about reliability and validity next. Measurement reliability refers to the accuracy and consistency of measurement. It's nearly impossible, if not completely impossible, to measure a construct perfectly with a single item. In other words, we can't ask just one question that is going to do a perfect job of capturing everything that we want in a manner that is both accurate and consistent from one time to the next. To understand accuracy and consistency, I like to think about the bathroom scale, you know, that dreaded thing that you may or may not step on in the morning or at whatever time of day that you weigh yourself if you would like to measure body weight. We hope that our bathroom scale or whatever scale we use for measuring body weight is accurate, that it gives an indication of how much you actually weigh. To be completely honest, there are days I get on the scale and I hope that it's inaccurate and that it gives me a number that is a little bit lower than reality. But I'm probably like a lot of people in that sense. But at the same time, if the scale isn't accurate and giving me a real number, then it's not really doing its job. With regard to consistency, what we mean here is that we want that measurement to be the same from one time to the next. In other words, if I get on the scale to measure my weight and I step off and then I get back on, although I'm secretly hoping to see a number that is smaller than what it was before, I also would be really worried about the accuracy and the consistency and hence the reliability of the scale if that actually were to happen. So the scale is functioning properly if it gives a consistent number if I get on the scale, get off, and get back on. In terms of psychological measurement, an individual's response to an item or a survey is a function of two things. The first is the true score, the actual value that accurately captures what it is that we're trying to measure, as well as some degree of error. Error can come from a lot of different sources. It could come from not interpreting the item properly, misunderstanding it, maybe not paying careful attention when filling out a survey, or it could mean if you're circling a number on a paper survey, circling the wrong number, or on a computer, accidentally clicking on the wrong button. The error can come from a lot of different sources. In theory, error is random, and it's our hope that if we experience error in survey measurement, that it will cancel each other out across the different items of the survey. You may have, it's likely, quite likely, that you've taken many surveys in your career and in your life, and you may have gotten really frustrated at the survey designers for having asked so many questions that go on and ask the same thing over and over again. One of the reasons why we ask similar, if not redundant, items throughout the survey is in an effort to get measurement consistency so that we can ask more or less a similar item multiple times or multiple ways in an effort to really hone in on what it is that we're trying to measure. And secondly, to the extent that we might be picking up on forms of error, that we are then able to have this error wash out over the course of the survey. In other words, another way of thinking of it is to not put all of our eggs in one basket in terms of our measurement. I'd like to say just a little bit more about measurement reliability. When we talk about good reliability, what it means is that we're actually capturing characteristics of the person and not the setting in which we're conducting the measures. So, for example, if you are completing a survey about your job attitudes, hopefully we are assessing how you actually feel about your job and gathering that information, and not aspects of the setting. For example, maybe you're in a hurry to get the survey done, and so you're not reading the items clearly or going quickly through the survey and just checking whatever box you can find. If you're taking the survey in a cold room, that could have some bearing on how you might be responding to the items and so forth. So if a measurement has good reliability, it means that we're capturing accurately what we intend regarding what it is that we're focusing on. If we have poor reliability, what that means is that we can't trust the results of what we've gathered. Earlier, I gave you the example of the dreaded bathroom scale. And if we have an unreliable scale, what it means is that we can't trust the number that we get, because sometimes we get on it and it gives us one number, other times it's another one, and it just messes up our ability to accurately make conclusions about what we're looking at if we can't have faith in those numbers and those responses. Statistically, having poor reliability can also decrease the linear relationship, the correlation coefficient between two variables that we might compare. The strength of the correlation, a Pearson correlation, which ranges from -1 to +1, the magnitude of that correlation will be constrained as a function of the reliability. I promised that I could go farther deep down the rabbit hole and get pretty nitty-gritty in all the statistics about this, but I will spare you that explanation in this lecture. If you have further questions about that or would like me to go further and talk in more detail about correlations and explain correlations, I'll be glad to do so. Just please send me an email to gwen.fisher@colostate.edu. So in terms of reliability, another issue is that if we have poor reliability, we might miss the opportunity to find that there is a relationship statistically between two variables. In other words, there might in reality be some degree of linear relationship between variables, but if we aren't able to use accurate and consistent measures for gathering that information, we simply won't find that statistical relationship. This slide lists 4 different measures or ways that we can assess reliability. The first is test-retest reliability. To assess test-retest reliability, we administer the same set of survey items, or the same test, if you will. For example, if it's a cognitive ability test or some other type of psychological test, we administer that same instrument on 2 different occasions and then compute a correlation coefficient to look at the degree of the linear relationship between the two different measures. So we would hope that an accurate and a consistent measure would correlate very highly across those two different occasions. The second type of reliability is parallel forms reliability. Parallel forms reliability refers to having two different but very similar measures or scales and comparing them across two different administrations. So for example, imagining that you have put together a questionnaire to assess job attitudes and then a similar but not exact same set of items to assess job attitudes, you could then correlate those two measures to assess the extent to which that those two different forms or those two different versions of the questionnaire are similar. The third measure of reliability is inter-rater reliability. Inter-rater reliability is a measure of the extent to which different individuals or different raters agree on the basis of something that they're measuring. For example, multiple patients that are filling out questionnaires regarding patient satisfaction, or in the context of a performance appraisal, if multiple nurses are rating their manager on their performance at work. To the extent that raters who are asked to measure the same thing agree or are consistent in their perceptions, that would be an indicator of consistency of measurement, hence a higher degree of inter-rater reliability. The fourth and final type of reliability or measure of reliability, as indicated on this slide, is internal consistency reliability. Internal consistency reliability is typically assessed with coefficient alpha, hence the lowercase Greek letter alpha shown here on the slide. Coefficient alpha is not really a statistical test per se, but it is a computation of a coefficient of reliability. This coefficient is a function of the number of test items as well as the average intercorrelation among the items in the scale or the test that is being assessed. Now that we've talked about reliability, the next property of psychological measurement that is very important is validity. Ultimately, validity concerns the notion of whether a measure or a scale or a set of items, for example, a scale or a survey to measure job satisfaction, actually assesses what it intends or purports to measure. In other words, is it reasonable to interpret the scale scores, the average that we might compute across a set of items that we think are measuring the same thing? Is it reasonable to interpret these the way that we want to? Validity is complex. In psychology, there is no single statistic that indicates if a measure is valid or invalid. It depends upon the purpose of the measure and how it is being used and for what. There are just a few kinds of validity that I would like to discuss next that are particularly relevant for industrial organizational psychology, as well as occupational health psychology or OHP. These two kinds of validity that are particularly important include content validity and criterion-related validity. I will talk about each of these types of validity next. Content validity refers to the degree to which the test covers a representative sample of the quality being assessed. For example, if our goal is to assess job satisfaction, content validity will look at and help us assess the extent to which we're covering all aspects of the job that are relevant and important for helping us determine whether somebody is satisfied with their job. To give another example, perhaps something maybe more concrete than a psychological example about job satisfaction, is let's say that you want to measure math knowledge. If so, a good test that has content validity will include all areas of math, maybe geometry, trigonometry, subtraction, multiplication, fractions, all different kinds of mathematical functions and principles. In other words, it wouldn't be very narrow and include just fractions. At the same time, we would not want this math test to include things that aren't math. So we would not want to have questions about reading comprehension or inductive reasoning or other aspects of, say, verbal fluency or things that we would all agree are not related to math. So by being able to make a determination of the content of what's included in a test or measure, it gives us some degree of the extent to which a test is measuring what we think it's measuring or what we want it to measure. Criterion-related validity is particularly important, especially for job attitudes, because it allows us to assess the degree to which scores of a particular measure or survey relate to other measures. For example, thinking back to Module 5.1, I showed a slide in which we looked at the correlation between job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and work engagement. One of the questions was whether those three different job attitudes are really, in fact, measuring the same thing or different things. Related to that, does job satisfaction predict what we would expect it to predict, such as somebody's likelihood to leave the organization or their job, such as turnover? So we will use criterion-related validity to determine the extent to which measures on a type of job attitude predict behavior or predict other attitudes that we think it should predict. Construct validity is another type. So let me back up and say that both content validity and criterion-related validity can give us evidence of construct validity. But in general, what we mean by construct validity is whether the measure relates to other constructs in the way that we think it ought to. In other words, does it follow our theoretical predictions? It seems logical, for example, that somebody who is dissatisfied with their job may have higher intentions of turning over, and therefore we would expect higher ratings of job satisfaction to have a negative relationship with turnover intentions, so those more satisfied are less likely to have intentions to quit, and vice versa. Another way we can assess construct validity is looking at convergent or discriminant validity. Convergent validity refers to whether it is highly related to other measures of the same thing or similar things. Discriminant validity, on the other hand, is whether we're confident that our measure is not measuring something that we did not intend for it to measure. Now I would like to talk a little bit more about measures of job satisfaction in particular, to go a little bit deeper into this notion of how we measure job attitudes. There are two different approaches to the measurement of job satisfaction: global measures and facet-based measures. Global measures present participants or survey respondents with a series of questions or statements that are general in nature. So, for example, presenting a statement about one's overall job satisfaction, such as, all in all, I am satisfied with my job. And the survey participant would rate their agreement on the item from, say, a 1 from strongly disagree to a 5 to strongly agree. This is likely the most straightforward way to assess job satisfaction, in which respondents are allowed to evaluate what matters to them about their job themselves and then report their overall sense of contentment. Facet-based measures, on the other hand, ask survey respondents a series of questions about different aspects of their jobs. These different facets may include things like pay, promotion opportunities, the work itself, and the quality of supervision or satisfaction with coworkers. Then the responses to these different dimensions are averaged to create an overall score of job satisfaction. Is one specific example of a global item of job satisfaction, very similar to what I indicated. Participant would respond to one item, overall I am satisfied with my job. This is an example of a facet-based measure of job satisfaction. These specific items come from the Minnesota Satisfaction Questionnaire, which actually consists of a long set of 100 items, as well as a short form available for 20 items. This is a copyrighted instrument. But this gives you an example of how the survey respondent can answer about their working conditions, their pay, or the chance that they can do different things from time to time, which gets at skill variety. Another measure of facet-based job satisfaction is the Job Descriptive Index, which was developed by Smith, Kendall, and Hewlin back in the 1960s. In the Job Descriptive Index, participants indicate yes or no, or whether they are uncertain about different aspects of their job, including the people on their job, work on their present job, and their pay, and so forth. So I have a few questions for you. What do you think are the strengths and the weaknesses of using a global job satisfaction measure? By comparison, what about a facet-based measure of job satisfaction? I wish I could hear your thoughts or know what you're thinking about this. So I'll just go ahead and give you my own thoughts on this. There are both advantages and disadvantages of each of these approaches. With a global measure of job satisfaction, it's simple, it's straightforward, it requires fewer items in the survey. In fact, past research has shown that you can do reasonably well to assess overall job satisfaction with a single measure, and it leaves it up to the individual survey participant to focus on what aspect of their job is most important. If you're ultimately looking for just a simple, straightforward answer, this might be it. However, if you want to diagnose or better understand why somebody is not satisfied with their job, or maybe on the more positive side, what people like most about their job and what they're most satisfied with, then a facet-based measure of job satisfaction will give you much clearer, specific information about what people like and don't like, compared to an overall global rating where you don't necessarily know what the basis is for that rating. Hopefully that makes sense. Next, I'll talk briefly about measures of organizational commitment. Organizational commitment can also be measured using previously validated and scientifically sound scales. This can be done using an overall measure of organizational commitment or a unidimensional measure, such as the Organizational Commitment Questionnaire, for which I'll show you a specific example on the next slide. In addition, another model of organizational commitment is based on overall feelings of attachment to the organization, and researchers believe that there are 3 different dimensions for this. According to the multidimensional view, organizational commitment consists of 3 components: affective commitment, which is commitment to the organization because of an emotional attachment. You like it, you believe in the organization. Continuance commitment, which is being committed to the organization due to a lack of other job alternatives or a feeling that one would lose a lot with a job change. For example, if we think about when companies offered typical defined benefit pension plans and the notion that you needed to stay with an employer simply in order to not lose your pension, regardless of what you felt you ought to do or how you feel about the organization, you might be committed or inclined to continue simply to not lose that pension. And finally, normative commitment. Normative commitment is being committed due to a sense of obligation. This might be a sense of obligation or loyalty to one's supervisor or the organization as a whole. This slide shows an example of a unidimensional measure of organizational commitment based on the Organizational Commitment Questionnaire. On the contrary, this slide shows an example of a multidimensional organizational commitment measure. You can see here that these items pertain to affective commitment, continuance commitment, and normative commitment. That concludes Module 5.2, in which we discussed the measurement of job attitudes. The next module, Module 5.3, will discuss work design and job crafting. Thank you.